Namaste.
Namaste, namaste, sir.
Namaste, sir.
Nam- Namaskar, sir.
Namaskara. Namaskara.
Yes, sir.
Dear,
Welcome to Dharwad Katte again.
sir, shall we start, sir?
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. Dear viewers of Dharwad Katte, and welcome to the Book Talk program. It is the first program of this kind, and with which we are starting a new series called Dharwad Katte Book Talk program, and it will be held both in Kannada and English. Today we are conducting the first book talk English. Mrs. Vijayalakshmi Dandreddy, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Government First Grade College, Sirsi. Dr. Prakash Balikai, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Central University of Karnataka, Kalaburgi. And Dr. Ashish Belamkar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Central University of Karnataka, Kalaburgi, will deliver talks on the book In the Domain of White Herons by Dr. Raghavendra Patil. So, I welcome all the three guest speakers, the author of the book, Dr. Raghavendra Patil, writer Dharwad, and the chair of the function, Professor Basavaraj Donur, Honorable President, Dharwad Katte, and Director of Academics, Central University of Karnataka, Kalaburgi. I now call upon Mrs. Vijayalakshmi Dandreddy to speak on the book. Madam, please.
Yeah.
Madam?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, madam.
Yeah. Very good evening to all of you. With my high regards to my teacher. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you are quite audible.
Okay, sir. Thank
Please
you.
go ahead.
Very good evening to all of you. With my high regards to my teacher, Professor Basuraj Donu, and my deep sense of gratitude to the renowned Kannada writer, Dr. Raghavendra Patil sir, who is the center of attraction of today's program and co-speakers and viewers of today's program. I would like to present my understanding on selected stories from the book In the Domain of White Herons by Dr. Raghavendra Patil. This is the book which is recently translated by Dr. Raghavendra Patil, and it contains six stories in this, and which were written originally in Kannada by Raghavendra Patil himself. Dr. Raghavendra Patil sir, we all know that he's a well-known novelist, short story writer in Kannada. He received Kendra Sahitya Academy Award for his novel Teru. Uh, in the era of postmodernism, a group of writers like Purnachandra Tejasvi and even U.R. Anantamurthy, Yashwant Chittal, Shantinath Desai, they all contributed a lot to Kannada literature. And even Raghavendra Patil sir emerged as a writer in the same era, but doesn't, he has his unique style of narration while constructing the plot of the stories of his own. And he shares, doesn't chase any kind of, the thematic concerns or techniques of Western postmodernism. He explores the artistic expressions of his own to narrate the stories. This particular, the collection of stories in the domain of white herons, which were originally written in Kannada, and recently, as I told at the beginning itself, the author himself translated his stories into English. So that non-Kannada readers can enjoy the unique style of Patil's story writing. The renowned Kannada critic, Professor G.S. Amusar, has written an introductory words to this book. I feel the critical note of Amusar gives the best route map to reach the essence of Patil's stories here. Uh, I just would like to quote a few lines from Amos, from the introductory part here. I quote the words from the introductory part. The stories modeled on the Western tradition are commonly preoccupied with the present, the past into bracket history. In these stories mostly serves to illuminate the present and is rarely the central concern. However, in the stories Raghavendra Patil, the past receives the primary attention. So these are the words which pointed out in the introductory part of Amosa. Of course, it's a very challenging job to talk on Patil sir's stories in a little span of 20 minutes, which is given to me. Within my limitations, of course, my limited knowledge, I try to throw light on first two stories from the selected book. In fact, I cannot go into detail of these two stories because of the time constraint. I try my level best because the two stories, especially the first story, is around trans for 48, 49 pages. In the domain of white herons, as I told, it contains six stories, as I mentioned it already. These are all the title of the stories. The black capped man with the craze to become a story, one solgi of wheat, Laya, Desigati, in the domain of white herons, the rolling wheels and the thundering sky. I read all the stories, and in fact, I enjoyed the style of narration, the ray of nativism, and in fact, the beauty of unique dialect of Kannada language. Personally, I enjoy the language and the picturization what the author has brought here, because it's very close to my heart, and even I belong to that part of area, northern Karnataka. Uh, Black capped man with a craze to become a story, originally written in unique dialect of Kannada, prevalent in northern part of Karnataka. The author himself translated his stories into English. In fact, translation is not just replacement of words from one language to another language. It's an art. Unless it holds the meaning and a message, what it wants to convey between the lines, understanding between the lines is very much important. The rich as well as a beautiful work of art cannot be as rich as beautiful. It appears when it got translated to the other language. What I understand, translating Bendre's poetry or Chandrasekhar Kamba's plays is very challenging. I find the same task with Patil sir's works. But being the author of original work, Patil sir has took up the task of translation of his own stories. Uh, I try to give the justice to the art of translation. The big challenge to the translator is to find the exact words in another language to the words used in original work. Especially, it happens, when the work of art is narrated in Desi language, what I quote. I feel the author faced this difficulty while translating his stories. For that, he finds a route to keep those words as they are in original, writing. Typical Kannada word what they used in that particular unique dialect, and gives explanation to them in footnotes. And we find maximum footnotes in this book to all his stories. As you can find in the second story, the title itself has one word, Solgi, and I come to that part later, what is the meaning of Solgi, because as the familiar with that particular language, we understand, but non Kannada readers or different part of different dialect of Kannada, they cannot understand it. So even getting the exact word for it is big challenge, so that he tries to give the explanatory note, footnote. In that form he used, given all maximum footnote he has used. I feel this tremendous work can reach easily to non Kannada readers, and they too can enjoy the beauty of Kannada language and even the expression what he has brought there. The artistic narration of writer builds the curiosity. The black capped man with a craze to become a story surrounds the character called Rayaru, who appears in his typical attire, always, wears a black cap on his head. The writer described the character in a way that, the reader's eyes start to draw the picture of the character immediately. They start to read the description. uh, the other character, a renowned writer and the narrator of the story, in between you can notice some of the minor characters appear, and they support the plot construction and even the support the construction of the character of major characters. The story sets in northern Karnataka. The characters roam in places like Gokavi, Jamkandi, Sangutti, Kalloli. So these are all the typical, names in the Gokavi or the Belgaum province. At the beginning of the story, the narrator expresses, I quote the words, the matter of differentiating between real facts and imagination appears to be very complicated and difficult, which marks, I end quote, which marks as one of the characteristics of the author. As I made a point at the beginning by taking some of the lines from G.S. Amusa in an introductory part, the past receives the primary attention in the stories of Patil. Here in the story, Rayaru, the character, a black capped man, delve between the past and the present. The unexpected meet of Rayaru at the bus stop, his unusual behavior, rigid nature, initially irritated the narrator, but the magic words of him and least botheration for his negligency of the narrator builds curiosity, and without any kind of logic, he gets into the conversation with Rayaru. In the first meeting itself, Rairu, took the narrator to the past glory of his family. The elaborate, the expression of Rairu gives the realistic picture of socio-economic and political life structure in that part of area. Problems faced by farmers, the way they tackle those problems, are some of the other aspects we can notice in the story. Uh, Rayaru told to the narrator the way he manages the labor problems. One of the dialogues which I find quite interesting, I quote, "Yeah, I don't need any laborer." It's a in the first meeting when the narrator, spoke to Rayaru. In that conversation, actually, the narrator was thinking that Rayaru approached him because to find the laborers in his place. It was not the fact, and he clarified it by saying, "Yeah, I don't need any laborer. I have got 10 families of bonded laborers, bonded families, not merely individuals." So some of the farmers with high, the maximum land, they used to manage. This is how, what exactly the typical picturization what he tries to bring here. In each word, Rayaru stresses upon the glory of his family, the reveal of his family's past glory. Of course, it takes the reader to the world of dynasties, feudal system, company circus act during pre-independent era, judicial complications faced by the landlords due to Land Reforms Act during post-independent era, and their fight in the court to gain back the lost lands of their ancestors. Rairo appears as the representation of all these, real facts. Many a time, justice in the court lies based on the evidences and influence in Indian judicial system. I'm not saying that it happens with all the cases, but in majority of the cases, especially in the context of Indian judicial system, and you can we all some of many a times we become the witness for such kind of cases. This ray appears through the character of Rayaru. The case was going on in the court regarding the ownership of the land. That was the day, the final verdict was in the court. Rayuru, uh, at the second time, met the narrator. He literally dragged him to the court, and he wanted to show his glory, and he wanted to show him that he's about to win, and he mentally prepared that definitely the victory comes to him. And in all that sense, he prepared and he booked everything. uh, you know there he went inside to the court by dragging the narrator, and there he pointing at the opponent lawyer. He told to the narrator, I again quote the dialogue, exact dialogue of Rayuru here. He's opponent's lawyer. I got him booked. He's opponent's lawyer. I got him booked. So this particular, talks about the judicial system in some of the cases. Very realistic picture he brought through this character, through this particular situation. At last, the victory lies in the hands of Rayaru. This is what happened in the story. One fine morning, Rayaru came to Pollalli in search of the narrator. The narrator was in home, and sudden entry of a
ಇದು
man whom
ಇದೆ
he
ವೆಬಿನಾರ್
met at
ಓಪನ್
bus
ಮಾಡ್ಕೊ
stop,
ಜಾಯ್ನ್ ಆಗಿದೆ
not having any intimacy, literally
ಲಿಂಕ್
shocked him.
ನೋಡಿ
Um, I'm finding some disturbance here.
It is solved, ma'am. You can.
Okay.
Please carry on.
Yes, Rayaru was, casual, as if he's very close relative to him, and he decided to take the narrator to his native, without actually waiting for the willingness of narrator. Literally by force, he took him to his native. Traveling in bullock cart, fertile land on roadside. There again, cylinder pillar was situated. It's all about 2 feet diameter, as the writer mentioned here. The description of the writer on the artistic perception and craftsmanship. A portrait of hanging on the wall at Wade of Rairu. Again, he used the term Wade. Wade means bungalow or a big mansion of Rairu where he dwelt. Though they blossomed from the hands of an illiterate, boy in the village, they appear as artistic or attractive as Ravi Verma's painting to the narrator. I feel here the writer tries to, say that the art doesn't have any kind of discrimination of caste or creed or religion. These are all flourished in the narration of the writer. The narrator, though irritated much by the rigidity of Ryaru, but enjoyed the hospitality and past glory of Rya's family. Uh, of course, readers get curiosity that why Rayaru lagged behind the narrator, though he neglect him, though he deliberately gets irritated by him. Why such rich hospitality to him? Answer is revealed to these type of questions which flow in the reader's mind, can be revealed in the last part of the story, that Rayaru pleads the narrator to write a story on the glory of his family. His pleading sometimes appears like an order to the narrator. That's what I find. Rayaru is fond of history. He wants to record the glory of his family in the past and present. As Musar has expressed in an introductory note, that the past receives the primary attention in the stories of Raghavendra Patil, seems apt in the context of this particular story. And one more thing, what I noticed, the story lays equal emphasis on both the world of fantasy, on the one hand, and the real world, on the other hand. Realism and imagination are two, of course, the contradictory things, but writer manages both the world uh, very beautifully in his stories. And of course, it's quite challenging given to the readers to differentiate between these two kind of worlds, which are so much contradictory to each other. Reader can enjoy the character sketch of Rayaru, who dwell into two worlds, the past and the present. When he lost in his in past, he wears the nature of dominancy and tries to show how powerful he is as his ancestors were. But in present, sometime he appears as very polite, humble, and kind of gentleman. Uh, Quite interesting part of the story is that uh, the end of the story, readers got to know that the narrator met Rayaru neither in bus stop nor in his wadi. He met him in his dream. He lied in graveyard, which was full of tombs, and got struck by Rayaru in his dream. Uh, so this is the end of the first story. As I told you at the beginning, due to the time constraint, I may not able to speak in detail of two stories which I selected to speak on today. I just give the highlights of the second story in the book, One Solgi of Wheat. Solgi means, as I told again, Raghavendra Patil sir has given maximum footnotes to maximum words what he kept them as they are in the original writing. Solgi means, in our northern part of Karnataka, one Seru is equal to 1.72 kilometers, probably more or less, and Solgi is 8 Seru, around 10 to 8 to 10 maximum, 8 to 10 kilograms, probably. These kind of description helps to non-Kannada readers to catch the essence of the gist of the story. And this particular story surrounds the character called Balava, mother of Husnappa. She's very talkative and had so much care, love, and affection for her only son. And in a way, she stands as the representation of typical village women in northern Karnataka. In fact, mother Slav, you can come across, and very innocent kind of nature of Balava. And she gets ready to face any kind of consequences, ready to talk to anybody, and ready to go anywhere for the sake of her son's health and her son's protection. And the entire story runs in such a way of Balava's life structure and her care for her son. Um, eh, One can enjoy the expression of Balava. Simultaneously, she gains the sympathy of the readers. So this is the small gist of the second story. Though Patil sir's stories depict the dark side of life, they are not pessimist in nature. The readers can find the brightness and even the beauty and optimism in his character building. Um, of course, one must read all the stories in detail to enjoy the unique dialect and realistic picturization of northern Karnataka. Typical attire of men and women is beautifully drawn by the author here. So, with these words, because another two speakers are waiting for to talk on the rest of the stories in the book. As I told, these are all my understanding with my limitations. In fact, I don't know how much the ability I have to speak on stories of the renowned writer like Raghavendra Patil sir. I'm very thankful to my guru, Professor Basuraj Donu sir, because he believes that each student is capable of such tasks due to his, the boost up kind of thing. Student like me is here today. I even thank Patil sir for listening my words and waiting for his remarks. And thank you all for your patience to digest my words. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am, for your wonderful views on the book. I call upon Dr. Prakash Balikai to deliver your talk on the book. Sir, please.
Thank you, Suraj. Am I audible, Suraj?
Yes, sir.
Suraj, am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please carry on, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
Senator
Please carry on,
Prakash.
sir.
You are quite audible.
Sir, I can't hear. I believe that I am audible.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Good evening to all. Firstly, let me thank Professor Basuraj Dono sir, who believes in his students at a great extent, and also Sri Raghavendra Patil sir for making me to read this wonderful text of short stories. I am given two stories in the domain of white herons, and the second one is the rolling fields and the thundering sky. Two very unique, very different stories. Uh, uh, Firstly, I thank Patil sir, for
Sir,
making me.
Prakash, sir.
I was disturbed for 2 to 3 days after reading these stories. Sir,
Dr. Prakash.
Frank, I was very much disturbed.
ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಲೋ ಟೋನ್ ಆಯ್ತು.
Prakash.
Way back, I read two stories. One, am I audible?
You're,
Sir, please check your surroundings, sir. Is there any
ಮೈಕ್ರೋಫೋನ್
fan?
ಮೈಕ್ರೋಫೋನ್ ಹತ್ರ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ರಿ ಪ್ರಕಾಶ್, ಲೋ ಟೋನ್ ಬರಾಕತ್ತದ ಅಷ್ಟ. ಮೈಕ್ರೋಫೋನ್ ಹತ್ರ ಇಟ್ಕೋರಿ ಬಾಯಿಗೆ.
Just a minute. Am I audible? Suraj, am I audible?
ಆಡಿಬಲ್ ಆಡಿಬಲ್.
Sir, yes, you are audible, sir, but your voice is low, sir.
Suraj,
Yes,
am
sir.
I
Yes.
audible?
Yes, sir.
What is the problem,
I can't
Prakash?
hear
We,
your
all of
voice.
us can listen to
Let me
you,
know
and you are not
whether
listening
I
to
am
us.
audible.
ಅಲ್ಲೊಂದು ಟೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಹಾಕ್ರಿ ಅವನಿಗೆ.
Suraj,
ಹಾಕಿದಾರ ಸರ್.
Yes, yes, sir.
I can't hear your voice.
The problem is with you, Prakash.
Yes.
Sir, we are hearing you, sir. You are quite audible, sir.
ಪ್ರಕಾಶ್ ಮೈಕ್ರೋಫೋನ್ ಹತ್ರ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ರಿ, ಬಾಯಿ ಹತ್ರ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ರಿ.
I think he has some problem. He is not able to listen to us.
ಹೌದ್ರಿ ಸರ್.
ಹೌದು. Somebody can call
Sir.
him and tell him.
Sorry for the inconvenience.
Yes, yes, sir. Sir, shall
So
we?
I am given two stories in the domain of white herons. Second one
Okay,
is
let him continue.
rolling fields and the thundering sky. Way back in 2009 or 10, I read two stories, one or two novels. One by Amrita Pritam, Pinzer. I couldn't take food properly for 2 to 3 days. It disturbed me a lot. Later, I read Vijay Tendulkar's Kanyadan. Then also, I was much disturbed. I was much disturbed. I experienced the same disturbance after reading these stories because in the course of my reading of these stories, I remembered Harding. I remembered Kuvempu. I remembered Aristotle. So I don't know whether these stories are optimistic stories or pessimistic stories because these stories start very at a point where we cannot, very unexpected time, very unexpectedly the story starts and the story ends at an unpredictable point of journey of the characters. Very unique stories. Truly speaking, it is said that India lives in her villages. After reading Patil's story, I realized that Indian literature lives in the stories on and about villages. So rich stories Patil sir has written. Coming back to the title, White Herons, I was thinking, what does it mean? Why Patil sir has given the title White Herons? Because it symbolizes something optimistic, something very clean, and something which there is hope, there is a kind of rainbow. However, these stories are not like that till the end of the story. Basically, this white heroines, it symbolizes white heroines. They symbolize the independence and wonder of nature, which must be preserved against the destructive forces of industrialization and greed. That is what I got from the Google. After reading the story, who is going to be liberated? Whether no, the Dalit character, I will come back to the story later, whether the protagonist is liberated or the mother of the protagonist is liberated or the Gowda himself is liberated. I was wondering about the characterization of Patil sir's stories. It's a very simple story set in the North Karnataka, Belgaum district. We have Lingaraj College here. We have Tilakwadi Street. I completed my 2 years of education in Belgaum. I am very much familiar with this city. Tilakwadi Street is there. Lingaraj College is there. Very specifically, All India Radio program Krusiranga is there. So in that sense, the story is very realistic. The story is very, very realistic. And the reader feels that something is happening nearby us. Something is happening beside our home. Something is happening in my own street. A very, very realistic story. It is the story of a Dalit. A Dalit, his name is Yelya. I will come back to the characterization, whether it is the story of that Dalit protagonist, or it is the story of his wife, or it is the story of the Gowda. I will come back to that later. Yelya owns a Mardi. A Mardi means a stony cultivating land. It was given by the Gowda, Raman Gowda, Gowda. And later it was taken care by his wife Parava. What happens is this Parava, she becomes a concubine of this Raman Gowda. Later, this Yella and Parava, they give birth to a son. The whole story rounds around this character. His name is Parivya. Parava's son, Parivya. But very interestingly, Parava calls this Parivya as Param Gowda. Means the Gowda is added, the suffix Gowda is added with his name because she believed, she asserts, she tells, she reveals that the son was born to that Gowda. And Parava asks for the land, and Mardi was given to Parava, none other than her husband, Yelya. And this Parivya, he cultivates it. He digs digs a well in that Mardi, and he makes it a well cultivating land. This is the simple story. The story becomes very challenging to the readers when this Gowda's son, Bhadra Gowda, he starts taking the ownership of that land. In the beginning, he also disowns. Let it be. Let the land goes to. Let the land go to Parivya, Parava. Let them cultivate it. He disowns. He is not much interested in the land. Later, what happens is this Raman Gowda, who had illicit relationship with Parava, his wife, means Bhadragowda's mother, was also not happy with this giving land to Parava. She makes it a point and she always alerts Bhadragowda, her son, But what happens is Bhadragowda had different business in Belagavi, so he was not much interested. Meanwhile, this Parava, what she does is she takes the signature of Raman Gowda on a white paper and she keeps it with her. It's fine. However, people keeps on kindling Pariva and Parava that you are the concubine of Raman Gowda, and Pariva you are the son of the Gowda. So we find this caste discrimination, class discrimination. We find many post-colonial aspects. However, Patilji is considered as the post-modernist writer. Many post-colonial aspects are seen in this story. Later, this Pariva's son, he gives birth to a son again, and he grows up, and he, being a very modern boy, he starts going to a college in Belagavi. He stays in the hostel. Fortunately, unfortunately, what happens is he comes in contact with this Bhadragowda's daughter. Bhadragowda's daughter. And Bhadragowda's daughter, because of the regionality, because of the village, because she had some emotional attachment with the village, she becomes more intimate with Pariva's son, Santaram. Santarama, what he does is, after when he starts going to the college in Belagavi, he renames by making the court affidavit. He renames himself as Yes Rama. Yes Rama. So he becomes completely modern, and he becomes very close with Bhadragowda's daughter. Her name is Geeta. They become very intimate, and the news even goes to Bhadragowda's wife, that is Geeta's mother. So it is a story of three generations: Parava, Raman Yelya in the beginning. Next we have Pariva and Pariva's wife Malli, and next the present generation, that is Geeta and Yes Ram, that's none other than Santaram, Pariva's son. I was thinking whether the story is about Parava, or whether the story is about Bhadragowda, or whether the story is about Yes Rama, with which the story ends. Because it is the very attractive story. He starts going to one of the colleges in Belgaum, and he changes his hair cutting. He dresses up in a modern style, and he was attracted by Geeta. And with his character, the story ends. I was thinking, what exactly Patil sir is doing here? Whether sir is telling the story of Geeta and Yes Ram, that is Santaram, or sir is much interested in Parava's story, who is a Dalit woman who was misused by the Gowda, and a half authentic letter was given to her. What the story is about? Basically, I tell you, the story is about the Maradi. It is not about any character. The characters are only symbolic here. Basically, the story is about Maradi. Maradi speaks here. That becomes the existential question for Parivya. That becomes an identity for Yes Ram, Santaram. What happens is, when Santaram, that is none other than Yes Ram, one fine day he goes to Bhadragowda's house on the day of Geeta's birthday. She was forced to go there. Geeta forces Yes Ram to come to the home for the celebration of her birthday. The moment he enters into Bhadragowda's home, Bhadragowda he was not knowing that Yes Ram is from his own village, and he was a Dalit. he asks about Yes Ram, and he tells that he is none other than grandson of Parava. Immediately, the moment Bhadragowda outbursts and he starts shouting, he warns Gita. Later, he warns Gita, but he speaks a word. Let me read it. See what he says. I quote and unquote. If ever he dared to sit any further, I would have sent him after treating him with my chappals. I would have sent him after treating him with my chappals. Look, you Gita, what are you doing? If somebody is from our village, should he be taken as our friend irrespective of his caste and other antecedents? Do you know who that bastard is? He is the son of the cultivator of our stony mould, Parivya. He belongs to the caste of outer street, and his grandmother Parava, do you know? She is the caste of outer street, was our grandfather's concubine. It appears that you are a foolish, thoughtless girl. So, he gets at the extreme height of his anger, and he was about to beat his daughter also. So we find this class hierarchy and caste hierarchy, class discrimination and caste discrimination when it becomes a challenge for the ruler. When it becomes a challenge for the ruler, unless Parava or Parivya or Santarama have not disturbed Bhadragowda or his father Ramangowda, there was no question. They were least bothered about the family, the Dalit family, Parava and all. However, it tortured only Ramangowda's wife. Otherwise, they were all quiet. There were many complaints against Parava and Parava's husband and later son to Bhadragowda. Bhadragowda never bothered about it. It becomes an existential question to him when this Santaram, who changed his name as Yes Ram and enters into his own house in Belagavi. So he says he will be beaten with chappals and you are a fool. So his question of existence comes through. Till then, I thought that it is the story of Parava only. And Yes Ram receives a telegram. Immediately, he rushes to his village. By the moment he rushes to village, the whole atmosphere of a village has been changed. The police come there and they warns Parava to give back that letter, and she was beaten very badly. Parivya, Yes Ram's father, he was beaten very badly, and finally the police who were sent by none other than Bhadragowda, they become successful in taking the thumb, the signature by by uh, Parava's son. So the ownership of Maridi, it changes. So here the reader starts thinking about the story. Whether we are reading the story of Parava, who has been a concubine to Ramangowda, and she always used to call Ramangowda's wife as her rival woman, and she also used to hesitate to compare her own son with Bhadragowda. So the whole story was taking round around Parava. And when Yes Ram, that is Santaram, starts going to Belagavi's college, we think that it is the story of Santaram. Now the story takes some other route. However, at this point, when Yes Ram, after he receives the telegram, he comes back to his village. The very significance of Maridi that becomes the center of the whole story. The center of the whole story. So what this Maradi is, the place which was nothing to Ramangauda, the place which was nothing to Yelya, Parava's husband, the place which was completely neglected and nothing was grown up there, becomes an existing question for Bhadragauda and Parivya also. So the whole story is about this Maradi. It is about land. It is about existence. It is about food. It is about cloth. They didn't have enough cloth to wear in the beginning. It is about their livelihood. And at the end, the reader also comes to know that before S. Ram left Belagavi, S. Ram and Geeta, they discussed their marriage. One of them, when they are going to earn, they have planned to marry with each other. Meanwhile, he receives telegram and he comes back to his village. The story moves to some other route. But this Maradi, it disturbs the relationship between Yasram and Geeta. It becomes the existential question between Pariva and Bhadragauda. It becomes the question of dignity, respect, honor in the village between Parava and Bhadragauda's mother, that is Raman Gauda's wife. The whole story is about Maradi only. However, Patilji, every now and then he introduces Maradi, what Maradi is, how it was just a mere land, a completely uncultivated land, a barren land, and about the letter he brings in this Maradi, and at the end, what happens is, when this Parivya was beaten very badly by the police and his thumb, his signature, his thumb was taken on the white paper, he rushes to that Maradi only. He doesn't run away. He doesn't run away. He doesn't get inside his home, or he doesn't speak to that police. What he does is, he rushes towards that Maradi. And what about these white herons? As Patilji very significantly gives the title, it is nothing but liberating from the greed. Who is liberated here? Whether Santaram, who comes back to the village, he is liberated, or Parava. Parava, see, this is a very psychological character. She has been struggling, thinking that one or the other day this Maradi may be taken away by the Gauda or his son. So always she was thinking, because many people in the village, they pointed out that you have taken signature on a white paper. It makes nothing difference as per the ownership of the Maradi is concerned. So it has become a burden and her existence also. So when at the end of the story, he rushes to that Maradi only. And he starts shouting. And he asking for his cultivated crops. He starts asking for his property. He starts asking for his land. He becomes a mad. He becomes an insane completely about the land. With the fear of losing that land, he becomes a man. In the beginning of the story, what I told in the beginning is, all these stories, I read these two stories. These stories starts at a point where we cannot expect, oh, this is the point of time where the story starts. And the story also stories also end unpredictably. We cannot predict that the story is going to end here. So in the beginning of the story, the white herons are introduced. In the beginning of the story, the white herons, where Parivya, before digging the well, he goes to that Maradi and he tries to send away those white herons. so that the white herons should not eat the crops and all. And at the end, when this Pariva, he becomes mad, he starts shouting. He starts shouting for the white herons only. Let me read one line here. Patil writes, Pariva suddenly understood their intention. Whose intention? Actually, it is the intention of the white herons who have come to pluck the crops in the Maradi. But see the context, how Patilji compares these white herons with the greedy people. They look all very polished, they look all very well educated from the aristocrat family, the Gauda, Bhadra Gauda who settled down in Belgavi, Geeta and all. But how they are compared with white herons here? Pariva suddenly understood their intention. They flew ahead of him to carry away his land, and the well he dug there. He started to howl, Ho, look there, ye Yawa, ye Malli, look at that flock of white herons. They lift and carry my land. They lift. How can the white herons can carry the land? So these white herons, very symbolically, they are presented here. They lift and carry my land, my well. The well I dug there. Ayyo Yava, that flock of white herons, they carry them all. What this all is? This all is nothing but that Mardi, his existence, his life, his struggle from his childhood till the almost at the end of his youth. He has reached his old age. So he has dug the well. He has cultivated that land. So all that was carried away by the white herons. I was wondering what these white herons are. Whether these white herons are the police or the Gauda's family or the time itself. So, bringing the context of the white herons, Patilji speaks about the existence of a Dalit man who struggles throughout his life. Very beautifully, he compares white herons with the society, which is greedy, and finally, this burden it is taken off. What I understood at the end is, see, he starts shouting, "Hey, you monsters, children of demons, you bilkers of first order." First order means you are the one who are the cheat. Hey, you white herons, please give me back my land, give me back my well. Screaming so, Pariva ran wildly, searching for the flocks of white herons. Malli chased him for some distance, beseeching him to come back, but she couldn't reach him and couldn't bring him back. Finally, Pariva, he was unable to come back to his home. How can he come back without the Mardi? So that Mardi is nothing but the Parava's existence, Pariva's existence, their life, their identity, everything, which has become the identity of Bhadragauda and Yasrama also. So unless that Mardi was given to Parava or Yelya, Yasrama wouldn't have been suffered. His education wouldn't have been disturbed in Belgavi. He comes back only because of that Mardi. However, the relationship with Geeta was another part of the story. So finally, Pariva, he goes under the shadows. Finally, who doesn't come back to his home? So Mardi was taken away. The white herons went away, and Pariva was also went away from the camp. He disappears. So here the story ends. It ends at a point of time where the reader expects what will happen to Pariva, what will happen to Yes Ram. There is nothing mentioned about Gita's and Pariva's son Yes Ram's story. What
Sir,
happens to their love story? Whether he was also caught by the police? What happens to them? Nothing is said about. But the story ends where Pariva goes in search of those white herons into the Maradi. So this is the story about Murray. The story also speaks about poverty. The story also speaks about disease, Elia's disease. It also speaks about class and caste discrimination. It also speaks about death. Raman Goda dies. This Elia dies. It also speaks about death. So there are many aspects of literature included in this story. And the Tilakwadi Street, Lingaraj College, that village, they all speak in this story. They come before the reader as a character. We can enjoy Lingaraj College. We can enjoy Krisiranga. No one speaks about Krisiranga nowadays. So this Krisiranga program itself is personified. So that is the significance of Raghavendra Patil's narrative technology, narrative skill. I was talking to Dr. Ashish. Dr. Patil sir can be called the Aristotle of Kannada literature. The Aristotle of Kannada literature. In the recent times, I have not enjoyed such stories. No story has disturbed us so much. Very, very interesting stories which speaks about our society, which speaks about our own neighbors. So which speaks about our own community. Community means human community. It's not the community of the Dalits, it is not the community of the Gaudas. It is the human community about which the story speaks about. Shivraj has sent the message last 2 minutes. I take last 2 minutes to speak about another story, that is the rolling fields and the thundering sky. See, after reading these two stories, what I understood is why Patil sir has translated these stories. I think the sir has translated these stories. If someone would have translated these stories, definitely these stories also speak about the language, the very local, some registers, clusters, and regional words.
Conclude.
Some other person, if would have translated these stories, we would have lost that quest of enjoying these dialects, local dialects. So the translation also becomes an ambassador of North Karnataka, Uttar Karnataka culture and the dialect. There are many words, like I have pointed out some words like Seragu. Seragu is everywhere in Kannada. However, there are some other words like
Dr. Prakash?
come back to those words later. Very interesting North Karnataka words which are used in Marathi also. Belgavi is the border district of Karnataka which connects Maharashtra. So Marathi language influence is there. So very unique words which have been borrowed from the Marathi language, which are used which are used by Kannadigas also. They are retained as it is in the translation. So we would have missed that first of enjoying these dialects. That is the beauty of this translation. It also speaks about the culture of the language and culture of North Karnataka region. So there is another beautiful story. It is about a Marathi family, Marathi family who are called
Dr. Prakash.
yes, in
Dr.
our
Prakash.
local language. These Simpigates are none other than Marathas only. Patilji retains the same word, Simpigate. We used to call them Simpigate during our childhood, who used to stitch our uniforms, especially uniforms and all. Now, let me very brief in discussing, making some of my observations on this story. It's a simple story about Vittala and Suganabai.
Dr. Prakash, please conclude. Please conclude.
We're expecting a child. Finally, with the blessings of Lord Vittala, they get a child, son, baby boy. And the boy was Vittala wanted to name the boy with the name of the god. However, the clash takes place between Sugunabai and Vitala, and Sugunabai wanted to name the child after her father, none other than Ranoji. Ranoji. Finally, the boy was named Ranoji. Now, whether the story is about Vittala or Sugunabai is the center of she is the protagonist, she is the center of the story. She struggles throughout her life. She struggles to give good life, all the pleasures to her son Ranoji. And Vittal, on the other hand, Vittal, who struggles throughout the story by stitching the torn and new clothes, and who was much worried about his son. At the end of the story, he dies. So whether the story is about Sugunabai who struggles, or whether the story is about Vittala who struggles and dies at the end, or is it a story about Ranuji, who is a very, very crooked and wicked boy, any boy like North Karnataka region, college going boy and school going boys, whether he represents that school going boys community, the reader always thinks throughout the
Dr. Prakash sir,
story
Dr. Prakash sir,
expected depth. The story speaks about depth. The story haunts the reader for many, many days, even after completing the reading. It's a very simple story. The marriage, Ranoji, at the very young age of 20 years of old, he was married off to a girl, and the story takes place. But what happens is, at the end of the story, this Ranoji, when his father unexpectedly dies in Ranoji's would-be's father's home, he runs away with the money which that Vittala, Ranoji's father, had. So there, the whole human existence, the familial life, it becomes a big question. Whether it is the story about parents and children, whether it is the story of Ranoji, or it is a message to the youngsters, the school going or college going children. So Patilji very sensitively brings the end of the story where the reader sees the rolling fields and the thundering sky. We get fear, we get pity about Sugunabai, we get fear about Vittala's character who dies at the end. So we feel pity and fear at the end of the story. So I think I have taken much time. These two stories I really enjoyed, and these stories they all speak about this regional language, the culture, North Karnataka culture. As I pointed out, if I am wrong, if I am right, sorry, if I am right, Patilji can be compared with Aristotle. He can be called the Aristotle of Karnataka. Thank you for your patience listening. Thank you so much.
thank you, sir. Thank you for your insightful thoughts about the book, sir. Now I request Dr. Ashish Beramkar to give his presentation on the book. Sir, please, you have 20 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Shivraj sir. I'll try to stick to the time. Good evening, one and all. Respected Donor sir, my teacher, and as well as head department of English, and also President Dharwad Katte. And special greetings to the writer, Raghavendra Patil sir. And I'm sorry, until recently I had not read your book, but again, thanks to Donor sir for introducing me to the in the domain of white herons. Now you are on the list of my favorite writers, and while I also to the participants and my fellow speakers. In 20 minutes of talk, I'll be talking about narratology, and in the process of narratology, I will be establishing Raghavendra Patil sir as a writer as a nativist writer who incorporates the elements of realism and also a regionalism, which confines to the North Karnataka culture itself. So I'll quickly jump into the topic itself. Narratology in Raghavendra Patil sir's in the domain of white herons. Now, narratology has two components. One is story, and other one is discourse. In terms of story, we have action, setting, characters, and the authorial coding of characters. I repeat, in narratology, there are two components. One is this story, and other one is discourse. In story, we have action, setting, characters, and authorial coding of the characters, the cultures, and the settings. And the second component is discourse. And in discourse, we have narrative structure, and as well as we have a manifestation of that narrative structure. So, in all of these elements, action, setting, characters, authorial coding of characters, narrative framework, and the manifestation, I would be, like I was telling just now, I would be establishing Raghavendra Patil sir as a nativist writer, as he is heralded as and as is generally talked about in terms of. And coming to the aspect of the characters, the stories which are given, which I would be talking about is number one, Laya, and number two, Deshagati. I'll quickly brief you about Laya in the meanwhile. But before that, let me get into the characters of Laya. I'll name the characters of Laya. They are Bharamamma and Bhimashi, Kulkarni, Gaudru, Husanya, Shivaraja, Narayana, Gogikolla Swamiji, and other Siddha Swamis. Now, uh, question arises: how is realism loaded in these characters? Now, the very names itself might sound a certain. The very nature of these names reflect a certain sense of nativity in them. Bharmamma, Bhimashi, Kulkarniyaru, Gaudru, Husanya, Shivaraja. These are the characters that we not very generally find in towns, or in that case, even cities. So these are the names which are very inherently, or rather, the nature of those names generally comes from the native land or the regional land itself. So, in this naming of the characters itself, the characters and as well as the component of realism is loaded into them. Now, moving on to the next aspect, that is setting. Now, Raghavendra Patil sir has used realism in carefully selecting settings of each and every scenes. For example, the settings that we see in Laya, the story Laya, is the courtyard of a home wherein one of the characters is spreading cow dungs, and we also see most of the story happening in the Chaudi, or a certain panchayat katte, maybe I can refer to as, wherein all the villagers meet and discuss the aspects which are concerning the village to them. And a bit of the story is set in forest as well, wherein the characters go in search of Gugi Kolla Swamiji. And again, the another setting is Adavi Mutt. Adavi Mutt is nothing but a matha which is situated at the outset of a village, wherein when all the Swamijis, one from forest and the other two from other two places, come to the village, they all reside there, and looking at them, the whole village shifts to the Adavi Mutt. And again, majority of the story happens in the Adavi Mutt as well. And the other setting is House of Kulkarniuru. So if you look at the settings as well, repeating the whole settings: courtyard home, the Chaudi, forest, and Adavi Mutt, and House of Kulkarniuru. These are all the settings again which reflect on the social transactions as happened in the native culture. The stories are not set in any restaurants, stories are not set in any roadside coffee shops, but rather they reflect on the native culture itself. They reflect on the aspect of Chaudi, they reflect on the aspect of Adavi Mutt, they reflect on the aspect of a certain panchayat Katte, wherein all the settings, wherein all the kind of incidents happen. Now, moving on to the next component of narratology, that is action. even in terms of action, the kind of actions that are selectively placed in these short stories reflect on the native culture itself. For example, burning of the cow dung. Like I was telling, one of the characters spreads cow dung in her courtyard, and along with that, there is cotton threshing, which happens. Cotton threshing, though we see in cities as well, but it has reduced over the time and confined only to the native paths. And again, there is beating of Dangura, which is reflected in the stories, very widely used in most of his stories. Beating of Dangura in order to send out any message across the village. I guess this Dangura beating is used in the native land. Along with that, we have rituals which are mentioned in the story, like the procession of donkeys, the gurchi, and also riding of bullock cart, and bathing in cold water, and people playing cards at the temples. So these are all the imageries, these are all the settings, the names of the characters, and the actions that they perform, which reflects typically of a native culture. And through all of these transactions, through all of these social settings, the a writer tries to establish, or tries to kind of illuminate the very native culture of the northern Karnataka. Now, this is about Laya. I'll quickly move on to the next story, that is Deshagati. Deshpati, again, will be discussed in terms of the components of narratology, that is characters, action, and as well as setting and the authorial coding of the characters. In terms of characters, the names of the characters are Venkoba Rao, Rango Patwardhan, and Kalpanath Desai, Manik Desai, Amrita. Now, if you look at these whole names, they are Venkoba Rao, and this Rango Patwardhana, and Kalpanatha Desai, Manik Desai to Amrita. There is a generational shift in the nature of names that is being accorded to the characters. So again, just like we saw in Laya, even in the short story Deshagati, the nature of names reflect on the shift of generations, wherein Venkobarao and Kalpanatha Desai and Rango Patwardhan are from the native culture, whereas further we talk, whereas Manik and Amrit are from certain city or town itself, as Manik is trying to move out to the USA by selling off the land of their forefathers. And in this story, we see a certain contestation between traditional view and also modern and progressive view. I'll come to that. So that's about the name of the characters, which reflects realism in terms of native culture. Next, moving on to the action itself. The action which goes about in this Deshagati. Now, Deshagati is a story wherein this character Kalpanatha Desai is more concerned about retaining the legacy, is more concerned about the idea of immortality, whereas his son Manik Desai wants to sell off the land of their forefathers, and he just wants to give it to some corporate marketing institution for profit and for money. But this is not allowed by Kalpanath Desai. So what happens is Kalpanath Desai is where he has built up a grand narrative about his legacy, has built up a grand narrative about his past, about his forefathers. So in this story, the first part talks about Kalpanatha Desai's fight with Manik, his son Manik Desai, of not letting his forefathers' land be sold. And the second part talks about the whole grand narrative, talks about how their forefathers had went on to establish a Deshagati, had went on to establish certain kingdom, and which now not much is left off because of the whole aspect of democracy. And finally, at the end of the story, now this the ending of the story is quite a shocker, quite certain. So there is always a sense of ambiguity in the ending of Raghavendra Patil sir's stories, be it Laya or be it this Deshagati. in Deshagati, what happens is this Kalpanatha Desai's grandson, uh, on whom Kalpanatha Desai is hoping for to continue his legacy, as Manik Desai is ready to flow to USA. But this Kalpanatha Desai, repeating the point again, Kalpanatha Desai has his hopes on this his grandson Manik, sorry, his grandson Amrit. But what happens at the end of the story is Amrit's half of the face is eaten by the ants, and he's dead. He's just a few years old kid, and his half of the face is eaten by the ants, and then he is just lying dead and cold on his bed. Now, such very, I mean, kind of anticlimactic endings, such very ambiguous endings is what we see in the stories of Raghavendra Patil sir. And again, to talk about Laya as well, the ending of the Laya. But before that, the story of the Laya is about a village which did not see rain and showers for almost around 3 years. And now, in the third year, they are more concerned about the rains, they are more concerned about their land, about their yields, about their harvest. And they are trying to turn every stone in order they are trying to meet the swami, they are trying to perform all the rituals for the rains to come, but nothing comes out of it. And finally Gugikola Swamiji gives them a solution, and the solution is to abandon the village and move to the forest. And it is in the forest that you will find the laya, it is in the forest that you will find the rhythm, because Swamiji believes that these people belonging to that village have lost the rhythm, have lost the laya, have lost that touch with the nature, have lost that communion with the whole cosmos around them, because of which he gives such a kind of a solution. And as a reader, in the due course of the story, I personally did not expect such a kind of an ending. I thought maybe there would be some kind of solution. There might be something, if not rain, at least a certain some water would be brought in the village. But what happens is at the end of the story, all the villagers simply abandon their village. The Gaudru, the Pulkarneru, everybody just simply abandon, and then they move to the forest. And at the as and how they move towards the forest, they see a kind of sunrise. They see a beautiful sunrise as described by the author, and there is the ending of the story. So it's a very ambiguous. We do not know. We don't know as if the villagers have already found Laya. We do not know if they are going to find Laya in the forest. We don't know if there is anything fruitful coming out of such a journey towards the forest. But the story abruptly ends there. So the ending of the stories of Raghavendra Patil sir's is always ambiguous. Like I was telling you, is at the same time open-ended, and at the same time it's very what's the kind of disturbing in terms of Deshagati's story, where you find a small kid's half of the face being eaten by the ants. Now, moving on to the themes of this story. No, sorry, I'll just quickly talk about the discourse which is used in the narrative discourse which is used in his stories. The discourse which the writer has used is third person narrative. Now this third person narrative gives the writer complete autonomy to tap into the minds of the characters at any point whatsoever. The writer can get into the minds of the characters, and then they can make them speak, they can give verbal expressions, or they can make the inner thoughts itself presentable to the reader. And in this complete autonomy, the characters are built, and characters are abruptly eliminated from the story as well. Yes, eliminated, because so many characters flow into the plot, and at the same time suddenly they just disappear. Such is the kind of narrative ambiguity in the writings of Raghavendra Patil sir. And in the discourse, there are two kind of discourses that we usually mention to. One is verbal discourse, and other one is mimic discourse. Verbal discourse is the discourse wherein characters speak, And mimic discourse, I guess everybody knows what a mimicry is, right? So such a kind of a discourse is where characters simply show gestures, be it a certain hand gesture, be it a certain facial expression, be it a certain laughter. So all of such mimic discourses are plentifully used by Raghavendra Patil sir in order to develop an air of supremacy among the characters, or in order to kind of showcase a certain sense of trauma as well. Now, since I've mentioned the air of supremacy and trauma, I'll quickly get into those mimic discourses of trauma and as well as the air of supremacy. Firstly, I'll talk about the trauma and the language of trauma itself. Now, in the story Deshagati, what happens is there is one character, Venkoba Rao, who is a kind of a dacoit. And this acting is way back during the rule of Peshwas and Mughals and Pindaris. So during that time, there is this dacoit called as Venkoba Rao, who has a lover called as Chimana. And one fine day, he visits this Chimana, having looted some gold and jewels. He presents jewels to Chimana, but this Chimana had already sold Venkobarao off to the Peshavas. In the sense, she had already leaked the information that this Venkobarao was visiting Chimana, and then they can come and take him off, as he was a dacoit, and people were actually looking out for him. But Venkobarao did not know this. He was completely unaware of this, and he visits Chimana. He presents her jewelries and golds, and then over the time he realizes that there is something wrong. Over the time he falls into an anxiety of betrayal. Over the time he falls into a certain sense of trauma that very soon the Peshwas would come and they would kill him. So in such a very traumatic or anxious state of mind, this Venkoba Rao loses his speech, loses his verbal expression, and all that he does in that moment is a sense of love. All that he does is for each and every statement that Chimana makes, he only laughs. He says, ha, ha, ha. For everything that Chimana says, this Venkoba Rao says, ha, ha, ha. He has nothing else to say, and he has nothing else to talk about in that particular moment. So this ha 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 is the language of trauma. This ha 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 is not a sense of laughter, but it comes out of a certain derangement of senses, which is invoked by a certain state of mind, which is both anxious and also a certain sense of trauma because of a certain sense of betrayal from Chimana itself. Uh, yes, so there is this. There are these discourses, mimic discourses, and as well as verbal discourses, which are plentifully used by Patil sir in most of his short stories, and these kind of discourses enrich the narrative framework in kind of developing plots in its own unique way. Having talked about narratology, having talked about action, setting, characters, and discourses, now I would quickly move on to the themes of the stories. And meantime, I also have a certain 2 minutes left. I have noted that. I'll try to finish it within that. So the themes which are found in Patil's stories are there's always this contestation between mortals and immortality. If you look at the very beginning of the story of Laya, what happens is there is a very interesting usage of metaphors. He says kites of clouds and he says courtyard of sky. Now, kite and clouds are two different things in its in its make. For example, kite is something man-made and cloud is not at all man-made. And he refers courtyard with that of sky. Courtyard, it's something which belongs to humans and again made by humans, and sky is just infinite and immortal. So this dichotomy of mortals and trying to claim for immortality is a very prevalent and recurring theme that comes across in the stories of Raghavendra Patil sir, as even in Deshagati, like I was telling you, Kalpanatha Desai he's so indulged in maintaining the legacy, in retaining his legacy, in retaining the Desai family's culture, heritage, and he simply doesn't want to sell the land. Though the land is barren, though the land doesn't cultivate at all, he's clinging on to that land and he just doesn't want to sell it. So he is so obsessed with sense of immortality that there is a certain sense of derangement of senses as well in the character of Kalpanatha Desai. We do not know if he's really in the physical world or if he is hallucinating. There is always that sense of narrative. There is always that subjective ambiguity that we see in the story of Deshagati. So next to the theme of models and immortality, there is also theme of absurdism. Now, this is a most interesting theme, at least for me. I mean, just in the last talk, Balikai sir kind of established Raghavendra Patil sir as equated the Patil sir with Aristotle. He's not just an Aristotle, but when I look at this theme, the theme of absurdism, I somewhere feel that he's on equal ranks with that of Albert Camus, and another absurd writer. We see that there is skepticism in Raghavendra Patil's stories. We see that there is a certain arbitrariness between word and meaning in Raghavendra Patil stories, Raghavendra Patil sir's stories, and also there is certain hopelessness in hope. Maybe I would like to take questions on this. I'll not elaborate on these elements since there is less of time. So, skepticism, the arbitrariness between word and meaning, and hopelessness in hope somewhere establishes Raghavendra Patil sir's sensibility as an absurd writer, and in all his writing style, he could be equated with that of Albert Camus, the great Albert Camus itself. Now, yes, moving to the last point of my talk, there are certain, there is a typical blend of myths and mortals in the stories. There is a typical blend of hope and rituals in the stories, and there is futility and as well as positivity in the stories. And in such narrative framework, Raghavendra Patil sir's stories truly reflect the native culture, and everybody is right in heralding him as a nativist writer, as he very inherently and very what's a kind of in its all true aspects presents certain native culture of the northern Karnataka. So with this, I thank the forum for allowing me to speak on this book. At the same time, I would like to thank Donu sir and also Raghavendra Patil sir for keenly listening to me, and also other participants. Thank you. I will be happy to take questions.
Thank you, sir, for your excellent talk on the book. I request Dr. Raghavendra Patil, sir, to respond to the book talk. Sir, please.
Thank you. Dear friends, first of all, I express my hearty thanks to Dharwad Katte Forum for organizing this webinar on my collection of stories in the domain of white herons. I express my wholehearted thanks to Professor Basuraj Donur, the founder of Dharwad Katte, and his co-workers, Dr. Prakash Balikai, Sanmani, Vijayalakshmi Danshetter, and others who have been enlivening the cultural interest in the literary society through such webinars. It is really heartening to know that Dr. Donur and his team are engaged in publishing an online literary journal also. Their endeavor to spread the love for literature and culture among the people is exemplary. Besides organizing this webinar on my book, they also spoke Dr. Vijayalakshmi, Dr. Prakash Balikai, Dr. Ashish Belamkar have spoken very nice words about myself and my stories. I express my hearty thanks to them all. Now, coming to my stories in this collection in the domain of white herons, these are the stories I wrote in Kannada between 1983 and 94. They were published in a collection titled Desagati. All these stories of Desagati were earlier published in Deepavali special issues of Prajavani. These are long stories, unlike the stories of in my earlier two collections, namely Vadapugalu meaning the riddles and Pratimegalu meaning the metaphors. These stories took a new path in which realism and beyond were bound together. What can be called as magical realism adopted here was not initiated in me by Marquez. I found this path much before I read Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. In fact, Dostoevsky hinted me for such path by the absurd incidents and episodes he interwove in his unique novels. Whether you write your stories following realism or magical realism or some other mode, it doesn't matter. What matters is whether your stories convince their readers, whether the readers feel the stories as real and convincing ones. These stories succeeded in such test, and Kannada readers received my stories with immense love. In fact, the stories created a special niche for me in the history of Kannada fiction. Dr. G.S. Amu wrote 17-page note on my stories in his important book, Kannada Kathana Sahitya, Sanna Kate. After Desagati collection, I published two more collections of long stories, Maya Mukagalu, Faces of Mai, and Estu Kadatava Kabbaki, How Much These Birds Pester Me. I presented two of my stories before the audiences of different linguistic states. They received the stories very well. Then I aspired for the translation of my stories into English. People told me, your stories are in unique North Karnataka dialect. They cannot be translated. Similar view was held about the poetry of blessed poet Ambika Tanaya Datta, Dr. D.R. Bendre. But Bendre's poetry were also translated. I know the translation cannot carry the linguistic nuances of one language to the target languages to the extent of 100%. But to reach the audience of other languages, one should get his writing translated to other languages. Then I decided to make a venture and I myself translated these stories into English. Many of my friends have accepted my translations as successful. I know it definitely, I know that it definitely these translation may not be 100% successful, but I am sure they do communicate major portions of their meaning. Here I remember an incident revealing the fate of any translation. Once some friend of Sri P.V. Narasimha Rao, former Prime Minister of India, gave him English version of 100 Years of Solitude of Marquez, suggesting that it would make very interesting reading. After some time, when Narasimha Rao met the friend again, he told him, true, the reading of the novel is very interesting, but not the one you gave me in English. After reading the English version, I fetched the original in Spanish, and that made the most interesting reading. The translation in English is very poor before the original. Yes, it might be very much true. But we don't know Spanish, and it is inevitable for us to read the English translation of the work, however poor it might be. And most of us are really enjoying that work in English translation also. The process of translation by a non native speaker is really very difficult. And also, the tones of Kannada and English are quite different. Kannada loves to be loud, whereas English is shy and loves to be very sane and sophisticated. To meet these two tones in the translations is really a Herculean task. But the task is an inevitable one if one has to reach the larger audience. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir, for your gracious presence and your motivating words. Now, I request Professor
Like,
Basuraj Donu, sir, to deliver his presidential remarks.
good evening to you. Shivraj, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Uh, my dear viewers of Dharwad Katte, Dr. Raghavendra Patil, sir, Dr. Prakash Manikai, Vijayalakshmi Dan Reddy, and Dr. Ashish Galumkar, and all my dear friends. It has been an important day for me because three of my very favorite students have given their presentations on the stories of not only a Kannada major story writer, but an Indian major story writer, Dr. Raghavendra Patil. I do not have any hesitation in saying that Raghavendra Patil is an important Kannada writer, short story writer, and novelist, and also an Indian important contemporary novelist and short story writer. I'm happy that my three students, they are young academics and they are committed to literature and literary studies. They have made very serious attempt to analyze these six stories by Sri Raghavendra Patil in the domain of white herons. And in fact, we have heard three important speeches already, talks already. In fact, four. I'm very happy that Dr. Raghavendra Patil has made a brilliant attempt to explain his own stories. And he did talk about the art of translation. And he also mentioned the difference between the Kannada tone and the English tone, and also the context in which he wrote his stories and how his stories were received in Kannada as well as in English. Sir, I have a lot of confidence in your English translation. I too have read all the six stories, but I don't have time to talk about your stories. I will try to write an article on your stories, and let me see if I can get it published in some journal or newspaper. And so, as I said in the beginning, that these are very, very important stories. I can make only a couple of observations. Dr. Raghavendra Patil is a major writer and very powerful writer, very powerful writer. And Ashish and Prakash talked about the ending of his story. You cannot expect Dr. Raghavendra Patil to end his stories the way other Kannada story writers end their stories. This is the significance of his stories. I think, like any other major post modernist writer, Raghavendra Patil sir does not believe in ending or in giving a final traditional touch to his stories. They're all open-ended stories, open-ended stories, and this is also a technique, a postmodernist technique. And I want my young scholars to take a note of this important feature of his story. And in fact, you all have touched upon all important dimensions of the stories of Raghavendra Patil. But I don't say that I don't have. I cannot say that I don't have anything to speak about. I have so many things to speak about, but I don't have time because Raghavendra Patil is a major writer and important writer. I must say that a great writer is one who cannot be exhausted. People have been reading Shakespeare for the last 400 years. And in India, we have been reading Kalidas for the last almost 1,500-600 years. But we are still interested in him. A play like Abhidhyana Shakuntalam or Hamlet Macbeth cannot be exhausted. So the stories of Raghavendra Patil cannot be exhausted. Every time you read his story, you find something new in it, something special in it. And you talked about realism and magic realism and imagination. And I think somebody said that realism and imagination are contradictory. They are not contradictory. What you call realism is not exactly 100% realistic. You know, I can write a realistic novel or a story, but there is still an imaginative element in it. That is the difference between an incident, a report, and a story. A report and a story. Journalistic writings can be 100% realistic, not literary writings. Not at all. Not at all. And Dr. Patil knows very well. He's a very sensible and sensitive artist, very great artist. He knows how to turn an incident into an art, how to turn an event into art. And about, I have also read Professor Amu's long critical essay on the stories of Dr. Raghavendra Patil, 17 pages. Only Professor Amur could do this, not everybody. And there he discussed all important dimensions of his story and about uh, Dr. Patil's interaction, negotiation with the past. Any story writer will have this. This is an advantage. It's not it is not a disadvantage. It's an advantage. You will have to negotiate with the time. Story means that. Story means you tell a story only after an incident or event has happened. Okay, it's always you always deal with the past. Okay, and even when you mention some certain things which are happening in the present or which are going to happen in the past, the moment you write, it becomes history. Remember, the moment you write, it becomes history. Okay, you can describe and you can describe you are going to office, but when you write a story about it, it becomes past. It becomes past. That is the beauty of the story. And the story always, as I said, it narrates an incident that has already happened in the past. And there are six stories in this collection. The black capped man with a craze to become a story. This is an interesting story because Patil sir tackles the process of story writing and what the story is, how a story gets written. This is really an important story in this collection because it talks about the story. The theme of the story is story itself. And one Soligi of feet anybody can read and enjoy. Laya Desagati, the domain of white herons. This is the story that has given title to this wonderful action. And rolling wheels and the thundering sky is
Shivraj, I think the connection
Sir,
disconnected.
yes, sir. I will contact sir.
I will call, sir.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Yes, sir has come back.
Oh,
Sir, please
okay.
unmute.
You don't.
Unmute, sir.
Yes. Somebody disturbed me. I got a call. Yes. I was talking about these stories, and Dr. Prakash also tried to explain the symbolic or the symbolic meaning of of the word this heron. Herons, we call it bellakki in Kannada. Bellakki. They are long-legged, long-necked freshwater and coastal birds, and they symbolize tranquility, serenity, elegance, and grace, harmony, and so on. And what is important about this bird is it walks with confidence. This bird walks with confidence, and when it flies, its gracious wings beat, and the beating of wings is quite inspiring, very inspiring, and it has other spiritual and metaphysical dimension too. So all in all, they are important stories. They are our major stories, and they take us to a world in which you find things which are very strange and which are very new and fresh. So this freshness, newness is the quality of any good writing. So I'm very happy that I must thank, in fact, Raghavendra Patil sir for giving his consent to Darwad Katte to organize this book talk. Sir, this is the first book talk, and we have started the series with three very important talks by these three young men, young persons on your book. So I am quite happy that Dr. Prakash and Dr. Lakshmi and Ashish, gave justice to the book. They drew our attention to important dimensions of the stories. And Ashish, I'm very happy that he talked about the technicalities of the stories. He talked about this discourse and the narration. I can see bright future for all these three young academics, and I wish them all the best. Thank you so much. Shuraj, you can take questions.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful remarks. I invite questions from the viewers. You can ask question to any one of the our speakers, or you can interact with the author himself. So I think there is no questions. So we come to the end of this program. I thank the guest speakers, the author of the book, the chair and the organizing committee members, and the viewers of Darwad Katte. And I request you to kindly join all our online and offline programs. Thank you, one and all. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.